Well, hello. Today I'd like to talk to you about a book called Idiot America. Yeah, it's called Idiot America. And the cover has, I guess, George Washington riding a dinosaur. So that's fun. I will be honest, I bought this book because I had just gotten into a writer named Johnny Pierce who wrote I think at that time just one interesting zombie novel, and I found out he was a regular columnist on philosophy, and I found out he was also a writer of several books. So I thought I was buying a John M.S. Pierce book, because in his more formal writing goes by John M.S. Pierce. No, I bought a book by Charles P. Pierce, so whoever that is. Sorry. So this book definitely intends to provoke a reaction right away. I mean, the title evokes a reaction. Idiot! How do you like being called an idiot? I don't like it. You know, when a parent calls me an idiot because I disagree with them about something. Yeah, that's not saying, I want to work with you and figure out how we can make this work. No, that's not saying that. So definitely the title provokes a reaction, especially with a subtitle like, How Stupidity Became a Virtue in the Land of the Free. Yeah, don't call me stupid either. That doesn't work well. And of course the cover art is George Washington in a saddle on the back of a dinosaur. Do people believe that? Why, yes they do. There are science books used by some Christian schools and homeschoolers that show Civil War soldiers, sorry, I'm looking at my notes and looking at you, Civil War soldiers posing with a pterodactyl that they shot. Yeah, that's a thing. Gotta support that 6,000-year-old Earth somehow, even if you have to make stuff up. Hi, editing me here. So I couldn't find my reference. I did find a lot about the Civil War pterodactyl, but just not where it was in the textbooks. But I did find where the ACE curriculum, Accelerated Christian Education curriculum, referenced Nessie. Yeah, the Loch Ness Monster as evidence for creationism. But apparently they've backed off of that in their European market. So back to the video. With the title and the cover, what the heck? Oh, sorry, misreading my handwriting. So the title and cover, I wasn't expecting a really highbrow book. I was expecting a book designed to provoke outrage in people like me. And it did. It starts well with a visit to the Creation Museum, the brainchild of one Ken Ham, formerly of Australia, who decided to come over to the United States to peddle his nonsense. Oops, I called it nonsense. More recently, he built a giant ark to prove this religious myth about a worldwide flood that, no, it really happened and all the animals were saved on some guy's wooden little boat. Ken Ham's ministry is all about the idea that obvious mythology in the Bible is actual fact, and the earth is only 6,000 years old. Now, Pierce admits in this context that the book was going to be called Blinking from the Ruins on page 5. And he ultimately went with a more incendiary title, because of course he did. If you're trying to sell books with mild title, like in the science world, where possible correlations between, don't get interest. Idiot America gets interest. Deserved? So my philosophy has always been that people deserve respect. They're people. Beliefs do not deserve respect. I don't like to name call, although I think I did once in this video already. Especially if it's on record. I might, if you're talking to me informally, I might say, oh, these dumbasses over here. You know, you don't do that as if you're trying to actually engage with people or have a intelligent discourse. So I do recognize my approach is boring. In 2016, a minority of voters here in the United States elected a man as president who had a unique skill at name-calling and being outrageous. Yeah, reason discussion just isn't nearly as much fun as name-calling and just being crazy. I personally wouldn't call a bunch of people idiots, but I'm not going to sell books either. But I will say this in Pierce's defense. He does get into specifics, and they are damning. I do wish there were references in his book. That would have been mighty handy for a couple of things I wanted to delve into. I'm just like, can't find that. If he was provided a reference, that would be great, because what if I want to fact check? What if I want to read more about a particular topic for myself? What if something he says in there was taken totally out of context? Don't know. Can't fact check it because there's no references. And you can slap those puppies at the end of the book for all I care. You don't have to put footnotes at the bottom of every page, but there aren't any. And, I'm going to be fair. I didn't know every issue in the book, but I did know, for example, the evolution issue in the Dover, Pennsylvania school district. I felt that he fairly represented everything there. He had editorial comments, but that is the nature of such a book, because it's not a report. He's actually writing on a topic, and is going to express his opinions on said topic. But again, I wish there were footnotes. So the first chapter of the book actually explores a 19th century man who popularized the notion of a lost continent of Atlantis. And this illustrates one of Pierce's main points. When people have a platform, it gives them some credibility. I have a platform that I'm using right now. I have some credibility with, my 5,000 and some subscribers. I'm a very slow-growing channel. I have a platform, so it gives me some credibility, so I've got some authority. Whether I deserve it or not, that's a different question, but here's this guy confidently saying things on the internet, so hey, he knows what he's talking about, because he's all confident and stuff. In the 19th century, books were a major platform. I have a book I want to talk about that concept, too. We'll be reviewing eventually. The next chapter explores several intellectuals who lost their presidential elections. It compares Al Gore versus George Bush. Now, he mentions this in the book, and this is the one thing I remember. And I was a lot more conservative back then, but this bothered me. One big question was in the media all the time is, who would you rather have a beer with? Yeah, that's not a qualification to be president. You'd think. But apparently it is, because the media was taking it seriously. And there's so much of politicians getting elected, it's just about how likable they are. Or, like in our 2016 election, who's good at name-calling. And, again, you don't even have to win the majority of the vote in this country. So, it's kind of like a likability index. You can look back at the Adlai-Stevenson versus Dwight Eisenhower election. So it's not a new thing. Eisenhower did play up his folksiness quite a lot. Adlai-Stevenson did not. But I will concede, Eisenhower was a smart man, and he was very prescient about a lot of things we've seen in our country today. That, gee, if we'd listened to Dwight Eisenhower, I like Ike, back in the 1950s, we'd be in a much better place. The chapter is called The War on Expertise, and it introduces the gut. It can go by many names, including Common Sense or Everybody Knows. And it shows up in one of Pierce's 3 premises. Any theory is valid if it sells books, soaks up ratings, or otherwise moves units. And media play into this with the idea that there are always 2 equally legitimate sides. Oh, we got a Dover school thing going on here where they're trying to inject creationism into the school. Well, let's get a creationist and let's get a biologist, because both sides are equally valid. Only one side has evidence and the other one has a book of myth. So they're not equally valid. In fact, I'm going to put a link down below because it just blew my mind. We have blogger Hemant Mehta, who is known as the Friendly Atheist. So he basically writes about atheism and religious type topics. And religious figure Tony Perkins, who's a preacher dude, televangelist kind of thing. And they were asked about gender and sex. Why? Neither one of them has any expertise on the topic, but actual scientists might actually have something useful to say. Of course, Tony Perkins jumped in with a comment, as you know he would if you've ever watched him. Hemant Mehta at least acknowledged that he was not the person to ask. Because again, you want to learn about gender, you want to learn about sex, don't go to the preacher, don't go to the atheist blogger, go to actual scientists and psychologists who work in that area. Don't care what the preacher thinks. Doesn't matter. So, yeah, go to the expert. And of course, they had 2 topics, and the clip is super short, and so such a short time allotted to it. And what was Fox's point then? Was it to inform? Clearly not, if we're given that amount of time. Of course, now the right has glommed onto that topic. And it was hilarious to... in that clip, we got to hear the Fox reporter dismiss Nature as a magazine. The journal Nature as a magazine. On par with, like, People magazine or In Touch magazine. Nature. Really. So, he clearly has no idea what it is. It's also worth noting that in this chapter, Pierce actually indirectly addressed my criticism of the lack of footnotes by citing Jonah Goldberg's book. Jonah Goldberg is a right-wing writer. Liberal Fascism, The Secret History of the American Left from Mussolini to the Politics of Meaning. Side note here, right now, 2022, there are some people angry at Joe Biden for using the fascist word to refer to some people on the right. Not the first one to do that. Donald Trump did the same thing. Doesn't make it right on either side, doesn't make it wrong on either side, but worth acknowledging. If you're going to condemn one, condemn them both. But anyway, back on topic. Pierce dismisses it as little more than a richly footnoted loogie. Sorry, I forgot this is what it said. I apologize. Little more than a richly footnoted loogie hawked by Goldberg at every liberal who ever loosely called him a fascist. Goldberg is dismissed as a crank, a term that appears regularly in the book, and he provides plenty of evidence. But this does segue to his second premise. I'm sorry, I'm still laughing. I was just talking about clever turn of phrase recently in a book video. And there's one. That's a winner. Okay, anything can be true if someone says it loudly enough. Politicians play that game all the time. So do a lot of media commentators. They just say it confidently, loudly, and they repeat it. And, oh, must be true. You just start to accept it because it sounds authoritative. And this leads to the rise of talk radio and the rise of the stunt or moment as politics. So he mentioned Oklahoma Senator James Inhofe, oh boy, tossing a snowball. I actually mentioned this stunt to my 8th grade class back when I was teaching 8th graders in earth science to illustrate the difference between climate and weather. And before I could even get that far, one of my students was, "Yeah, go get them libs!" I was like, oh God, you're 14. Lighten up on the politics, kid. But anyway, Senator James Inhofe tossed a snowball on the Senate floor as an attempt to debunk climate change. Never mind, he totally illustrated his complete ignorance of the difference between climate and weather. But people love his grand stunt. Weather is short term, that's Oh, it's 60 and the sky is clear out there. My neighbors are probably wondering why I just opened up the curtains. Climate is a long-term thing. And his third premise is that fact is that which enough people believe. Truth is determined by how fervently they believe it. You don't hear the word evidence there, do you? So this brings in religion. So he explores the Dover versus Kitzmiller case in Pennsylvania. Judge John E. Jones III seemed like the worst possible judge for that case. He's a right-wing Bush appointee. And the background basically is that the Dover School Board wanted to change the biology textbook in the local high school. At the same time, the area had changed as new people had moved in and the number of evangelical Protestant churches had exploded, of course. Religious people got on the board, and they proposed changing the biology curriculum because, as one board member declared, the previous book was laced with Darwinism. Of course, by 2004, which is when this all took place, you couldn't get away with just proposing, God did it! So instead, the tactic became to replace creationism with the phrase intelligent design. We're not saying God. It could be aliens. It could be, advanced people from the past. We just don't know. But really, it's a distinction without a difference. And they wanted intelligent design mentioned in the classroom. And to their credit, the science teachers at the Dover High School hit the roof. It's worth noting that Judge Jones ruled so decisively against the school board that attempts to fight evolution in schools are starting way, way, way behind. And I will just mention again that you come down to the evidence thing. One side has a lot of evidence, the other side has a book of mythology. And whose book of mythology are we going to take? Are we going to take the Christian one, the Muslim one, Jewish one? They're all kind of the same. What about the whole library of Hindu books of mythology? Which one? So, we come back to evidence. So another case that frequently comes up, and which he brought up, was the Terry Chavo case. I remember this one. I had to think about this one a lot back when it was happening, and I evolved a lot as a person thinking about it, because I had to think through a lot of issues like what actually defines a person, what defines a life, and so on. But it was quite controversial at the time. So Terry Chavo was a brain-dead woman in hospice, which is a place where you go at the end of your life. And so she was leading toward the end of her life. Her husband was ready to give her body peace. Her mind was dead by then. Her parents were not. And I get it. The parents love their daughter, and they're hoping against hope, despite what all the experts say, that nope, she's in there somewhere, we can bring her back somehow. Look, she smiled, all the hope you can have. And I get it. I get where the husband probably had it for a while, but eventually he's like, I got to move on with my life because she's not coming back. I've got to be realistic. So it was actually brought to the courts. But the situation went bonkers nuts crazy. I wrote the situation exploded here, but I decided to editorialize since the title of the book is Idiot America, I can editorialize and use extreme language. So protesters actually started threatening the workers at the hospice. And who cares about the needs of the other people at the hospice? Even though this is making it hell for them too. The people who worked at this hospice were absolutely demonized. Governor, please clap, Jeb Bush, signed into law a measure giving him the unilateral power to replace her feeding tube because they wanted to remove her feeding tube. It was also unconstitutional. Why does that stop anybody? And contradicted an earlier law. Under President George Bush, I wrote the wrong Bush here, this became national news. And many lawyers just didn't dare get involved. But the important thing here is that this was not an issue of disagreement over medical care between medical experts. Science was on one side, religion and passion were on the other side. And like I said, I totally sympathize with the parents who hoped against all reason and all evidence that their daughter would come back to life. My firm belief, no parent should ever have to outlive their kid. I know someday I'll face losing my parents, and that's just part of life. I don't want them to ever face losing me. So I get it. I do get it. But I also remember how her husband was demonized in the media because, after a few years, he's like, I'm an adult man, I got to move on with my life. There's no hope here. And I remember there's just a whole circus around the tragedy. And again, what was lost is what the experts say. I don't care what some preacher says. They don't make medical decisions. Most of them are not medical professionals. They don't know. But the loud voices became the news and the passion, no matter what their expertise was. As Isaac Asimov once observed, the strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. So what the book does is it analyzes many such tales. This kind of stuff can be hard and very frustrating to read. And it's scary, really scary, to read the power of ignorance and just about all the people who've been misled by ignorance spoken loudly and confidently. And I can't help but wonder if Pierce was sort of predicting our present age in which a sore loser can deny the reality of an election that he lost by a landslide, and millions of people swallow it, to the point of attempting to overturn that election by violence. And now has become more popular for politicians to claim, without evidence, that any election they lose is stolen. Right now, September 2022, we've got a politician in Brazil trying the same thing. We haven't even had the election yet, but he's already claiming that he will win by a landslide. If he doesn't, it's faked. A loud voice may shout it. They may speak with total confidence. The problem is too many are going to follow it. Real evidence equivocates. It has gray. It's nuanced. And it's not really inspiring stuff. Now, I'll be honest, I doubt I will reread this book. It does lead toward provoking a reaction, and it's not really scholarly. That doesn't make it wrong. So, yeah, it's one of those books I wish I would have gotten out of the library instead of reading and buying from a bookstore, but I am glad I read it. I learned a lot more. I learned some details about things I hadn't said. I didn't know. I also learned about a bunch of issues that I hadn't heard about before. But the weaknesses are there. It does not have the footnotes that I wish it did. And sorry, that cover and that title are a turnoff if you're looking toward reasoned discussion. So, make of that what you will. Well, thank you for watching. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.